we welcome you to our very special Law Day fireside chat with Department of Investigation Commissioner Jocelyn Strauber. Thank you for being here. Exciting. She's joined by Ben Max, veteran journalist who serves as our center's executive editor and program director, as she discusses courage, independence, and government integrity. As New York's law school, for the past 134 years, we've always felt a very special responsibility to engage on the key legal and policy matters affecting New York and the nation and serve as a resource and partner to the government and civic community. This includes 1/3 of our graduates who enter public service and public interest roles each year, mostly in city and state government, and a number of whom go to work at DOI. I'm also proud that DOI's General Counsel and Deputy Commissioner of Legal Affairs, Andrew Brunsden, currently serves as an adjunct professor here, teaching courses that are key to issues of rule of law. And we also are very fortunate to have Michael Siller, who formerly held that role, as our Chief Compliance Officer and Counsel. And interestingly, he also runs our Office of Global Student Affairs and is dealing with our international student population. A very important role, and one that he recently took on just in the nick of time last summer. I also just want to acknowledge in the room we have the CEO of the New York City Housing Authority, Lisa Bobahaya. Thank you for being here. We have Commissioner Asim Rehman, who is also an adjunct professor. He's the Commissioner of Oath. And we also have Judge Melissa Lewis from the Manhattan Criminal Court. Thank you for being here. I'm honored to see so many of their DOI colleagues in attendance today. As a former public servant working in City Hall for many years, DOI was one of my closest group of colleagues, and I'm very proud that they're here. I am a huge admirer of the work of the agency and a believer in it. It's one of the nation's oldest law enforcement agencies, founded 152 years ago, 18 years before our own law school's founding. And since 1873, DOI has had a proud legacy of never slowing down in the fight to keep integrity in government and to root out corruption. That's why today, as it is Law Day, we celebrate and honor Commissioner Strauber and the importance of rooting out corruption and upholding integrity as foundational to the rule of law. Established by President Eisenhower in 1958, Law Day is a national observance dedicated to celebrating the rule of law and reminding us of its essential place in maintaining justice, equality, and freedom in our democracy. This year's reflection carries particular urgency. We are living through a time of widespread disengagement from civic life, where legal institutions are often misunderstood or mistrusted, and the very idea of democratic participation seems strained. In this climate, the rule of law cannot be self-sustaining without active commitment of those who understand its purpose and power, especially those of us in the legal profession who have an obligation to advocate and to teach. Law Day is also a reminder that the rule of law is not a passive condition, but a daily mission. It requires fairness in process, equality in the administration of law, transparency in governance, and very often courage. On this Law Day, I encourage each of you to recommit to these ideals, reflect on what drew you to the legal profession or to study law, and envision the kind of society you want to help build. Let us never take the rule of law for granted, and let us lead with integrity, commitment, and courage that this moment demands. Today, we are incredibly honored to be joined by one such leader who does exactly that. Commissioner Strauber has demonstrated unprecedented courage and determination to uphold the rule of law, public integrity, and to hold accountable everyone subject to her purview, from the bottom all the way to the top. There have been many extraordinary leaders at DOI, but Commissioner Strauber's work has been unprecedented and serves as a model for all public servants. That is why she is speaking on our campus almost 1 year after she spoke for our City Law Breakfast last May. And just like that program, today again, we have several current NYLS students in the audience, and I know they will be inspired by her work and her remarks, as well as the opportunity to sit in a room with so many dedicated lawyers and public servants. Commissioner, thank you for your service, your fearlessness, and unshakable commitment to principles that govern our profession, which also serve as the foundation of our democratic system and keep the city we love running well. And thank you, everyone, for being here and for your own courageous leadership and unimpeachable integrity as we move forward. Ben?
Okay, a lot to live up to here. Thank you, Dean Crowell. As the Dean mentioned, I'm Ben Max, Executive Editor and Program Director at the Center for New York City and State Law here at New York Law School. I've been here about 1.5 years, and we're trying to bring additional programs to you, and very happy to have you all here today and everybody watching by live stream or will hear this or watch this in the coming days and weeks. So thank you all for being here, and please do keep coming to our events because we're having a lot of good ones. Thank you for being here. We're not going to give a full bio resume of you, but why don't take a moment and say a little bit about your career bringing you to the Department of Investigation, please.
Well, thank you. It's very nice to be here. Thank you, Dean Crowell, for the very kind introduction. And I will get to my bio in 1 minute. But the first thing I really do want to say is that the work that we've done over the last few years is really a credit to the wonderful people of DOI, many of whom I'm so happy to see in this room. And it's really their courage and tenacity and perseverance, in the face of staffing cuts and all kinds of other significant challenges that have made the last few years of work that we've done together possible. So I'm extremely grateful for that. I really every day am happy to have the opportunity to be back in public service and to be doing this work, alongside many of the people who are in this room. So I started my legal career really after clerking in private practice on the defense side, doing principally, white collar criminal defense, so defending institutions and to some extent individuals in DOJ, SEC, Attorney General's office, and other types of investigations. After a few years, I went to the Southern District of New York as an AUSA, where I worked for 8.5 years, ultimately becoming the co-head of what was then called the Terrorism and International Narcotics Unit. I left that job to go back into private practice, again, to do work similar to what I had done sort of early in my career on the defense side. And then just over 3 years ago, was really thankful to have this opportunity to come back into public service in this way. It's my first time working in city government, but I've spent really my whole life, other than going away to school, in New York. So it's wonderful to be doing this work, in this setting and for the city that really has been where I've raised my own family, where I grew up, and sort of has given me so much.
Prosecution, defense, what do you prefer? What at this point in your career?
I think there's nothing like public service. And I think many of the people in this room sort of know what I'm talking about when I say that, in terms of, the work is meaningful, significant. It's also fascinating. It's wonderful that sort of part of my job now is to try to read as much as I can about what's written about New York every day and see what's happening in the city and see where we can make a difference. I think that, it's private practice is challenging and interesting. I actually enjoyed having clients and having that interaction, but I think there's nothing like public service, and it's, you can't necessarily spend your whole career doing it. Not everybody does, but I think any amount of time that you can spend doing this work is worthwhile and enjoyable.
Most people in this room might have a very good sense of what DOI is and does, but some might not, and certainly some who might be listening to this when we post it in the podcast feed and on YouTube and elsewhere might not. So what's your quick overview of how DOI has a unique role in city government and what its mission is?
So we are the city's independent inspector general. I think what's unique about the agency is that we are a mayoral agency. We are a city agency. And yet it is our job to independently oversee city government, which means, I think, not that we are isolated from other city agencies or from City Hall. Those agencies and City Hall can be important partners for us in many of the things that we do. And our agency relationships in particular are critical to our oversight mission. But it does mean that we make our own judgments and determinations about what we will investigate, how we will investigate, whether we'll refer a case for prosecution or not, and ultimately what our conclusions are, and that we speak about those conclusions, whether it's through our reports, whether it's publicly to the press, at our own discretion, right? We don't run our statements by City Hall. We're not coordinating a message with the administration or even with any agency. And so when we take a position, the public should have confidence that it's based on our investigative expertise, experience, the work that we've done, the facts that we found, and that we're not influenced by any other sort of agency or political agenda or official or anyone else.
In that regard, you have a lot of choices to make as DOI commissioner. You spoke about budget cuts. We'll get to that maybe in a little bit, but you have a lot of choices to make. You don't have to lean in on policy reports. You can, focus almost exclusively on investigations. You can defer on things that might seem like more complex investigations to try to churn through ones that might look more simple. How do you make some of those choices, and any examples you want to give about sort of some of the lines you've drawn as commissioner?
Well, I think to the specific questions you've asked, we really try to do it all, actually. We do complex policy reports. We issued, I think, 15 of them last year. We also, during that time, did numerous complex, high-level investigations, some of which are still ongoing. So I think what we really try to do is leave to the inspectors general, who really have the knowledge and the expertise of their agencies, the sifting through complaints, deciding what investigations are worthy. And I think what we've tried to do as an executive team, over the last few years, is make sure that we are focusing our efforts and our resources on the most impactful matters, whether they're going to yield a public report, a criminal referral. We're looking for things that impact the city. And what does that mean? There could be a significant financial, component involved. There could be a person in a significant role involved. There could be a policy issue that we think is, particularly important. And we try to make decisions that way rather than deciding in advance, we're too busy to focus on this category of things or that category of things, because you never really know when a complaint comes in. It may seem small at the beginning. Is it going to lead to something bigger? And so we try to make sure that the folks who are sort of on the ground working with the agencies, who really are the experts, make those decisions, and that we help shape the work so that it's as efficient as possible, particularly in this environment.
Sometimes I think about an agency like yours and the executive team, and I think about, related to my experience in journalism, and I think about, an editorial meeting where you have people sort of pitching stories, assigning stories, and you have to make decisions about what to pursue. Can you take us a little bit inside DOI in terms of what that looks like? You mentioned you have the inspectors general who have their agencies that they focus on and so forth, but say a little more about, you see something, as you mentioned, you're reading, you come into a meeting with your executive team and you say, hey, we got to follow up on this report I just saw in the news, or how do those meetings and those decisions go?
Yeah, it's a pretty organic process. Sometimes it does happen just that way. We will read something, and I think we're always thinking, and it's not just the executive team, it's our IGs as well, is this something where we could make a difference? Sometimes, frankly, it's a problem that we're already looking at. Doesn't mean we don't learn a lot from the media, because we really do, and we pay close attention to the coverage of the city. But it's totally typical, multiple times a week, there will be articles that we see where we say, hey, what do you think of this? Do you think we should dive into it? Again, those go out to the IGs and their teams, and we talk together about, is there something for us to do here? And similarly, when complaints come in, sometimes we hear about them right away if they're of particular significance. Otherwise, the inspectors general may decide to kick the tires on something, and then they kind of know, and we've tried to work with everyone to make sure people know when they need to bring it up to our attention. Does it involve an agency head? Does it involve someone who's particularly a senior official? That kind of thing.
As you mentioned, your 15 policy reports last year, and reviewing your calendar year 2024 report, there were a lot of those policy reports. There were a lot of investigations. Do you want to give a couple examples that stand out to you of investigations in particular that you think highlight best the work DOI has done recently?
Sure. So one case, and there are many, and
Sure.
It's kind of hard to pick among, like your favorite child type of thing. So I really do find this difficult, because each case I think has something unique about it that's important to the city. But one case that I think sort of exemplifies the kind of work that we do were the charges that were announced last year against the two chiefs of the Bureau of Fire Prevention. And essentially what they were doing allegedly, and both have now pled guilty, one has been sentenced, was they were allowing, the role of the Bureau of Fire Prevention is to approve construction projects in residential and commercial buildings in the city and to ultimately sign off on, it's not really the construction projects, that's not the right way to say it, signing off on the fire safety features for those buildings so that they can, be used in the way that they're intended to be used. And they were essentially allowing clients with certain projects to jump the line because those clients were paying an associate of theirs who was in turn paying them bribes. So the review process was not, they were not necessarily approving, the allegation was not that they were approving projects that shouldn't have been approved, but rather that in a backlogged context, they were letting certain projects jump the line because those people were paying. So it was like a classic kind of pay-to-play scheme. And we got that case through a tip from the fire department. Again, they had received a complaint. They sent it to us. That's how the process should work. And the better lines of communication we have with the agencies that we oversee, the better work we can do. That's just a fact. So we took that complaint. We started working on it. We brought in, our law enforcement partners at the FBI. We do a lot of cases with. Ultimately, brought the case to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, worked the case together sort of as a partnership, which is another unique thing about the way DOI works. We don't simply do our own investigation and kind of prepare a report and then send it to a prosecutor's office to see if they're interested. And the reason we don't do that is the best criminal cases are built hand in hand with the prosecutor who's going to try them. It's how you make sure that, first of all, you're efficiently seeking the evidence that's really needed for a criminal case, which could be different than what you'd focus on if you were just going to issue a report or make an administrative referral. You also want to make sure that you don't unintentionally create unusable evidence, for example, by compelling an interview, which is something DOI has the authority to do, but that's not an authority you would want to use in a criminal case, right? Because then that evidence wouldn't be usable. So we worked that case together. And then ultimately it was, a strong case, as you can see by the relatively speedy guilty pleas that we got. And that's sort of, I think, a model for the kind of work, that we do and the way that we do it.
Let me ask you about another one that, to me, well, I'm interested in your opinion on this and analysis of this about how it does or does not speak to sort of systemic issues in city government. Your examination of contraband smuggling into city jails and the different rules for city employees. Say a little bit about what you found there and your recommendations, and if you think that speaks to broader issues and themes and patterns across city government.
Sure. So, historically, and we've done a number of cases in this space, predating my tenure, there has been a historical problem with correction officers smuggling contraband, which can be drugs, cell phones, weapons, into Rikers. Very significant problem. Rikers has a significant narcotics problem, right? There have been a number of overdoses over the years that obviously are very serious. And so what we've seen there, and a recent report that we did on this in connection with the announcement of a number of criminal charges against corrections officers last year, what we've seen is that there are certain sort of structural features that essentially facilitate the introduction of contraband. So, for example, one of the recommendations we made that I believe still has not been implemented is that the front gate staff should not be correction officers. They should be outside law enforcement or contractors, because there is an incentive not to sort of rigorously search and report on, your fellow officers. So that's sort of one example. There's also literally structurally, there are lockers for officers after they go through, the checks in the front gate and the magnetometers and all of that. So you're allowed to bring in a cell phone with the understanding that you will then put it in your locker. But there is no check on whether you in fact put the phone in your locker. So you can bring in a cell phone that is not in fact a phone for personal use, but a phone that is actually something you intend to distribute to, person in custody, just for example. And we've recommended multiple times that there be structures built outside the front gates where officers can store their personal belongings. So we're not faced with a situation where a device that is contraband can come in looking totally legitimate with a sort of, expectation that it's going to be stored, but it's not going to be stored. It's then going to be introduced. There's bottles can be brought in, with liquid in them that are not opened and checked. So there are many problems with the way screening of officers is done. And we have over the years made recommendations, many of which have not been implemented. And as we've seen, and as we said in that report, the problem persists. In terms of trends, we did a sort of related report relating to the detention facilities for youth in the city. And since Raise the Age, one of the things that we reflected on is that a lot of the problems that you see at Rikers, you're also seeing in the two detention facilities in New York, Horizon and Crossroads, where you now have older residents who were charged with more serious offenses. You're seeing contraband being introduced there too. And we did a case last year in the Eastern District against 6 youth development specialists. Those are basically the staff who are supposed to keep the facility secure, to make sure the residents are doing what they're supposed to be doing. The allegations in that case was that those staff members were also introducing contraband. So I think it's a significant problem. It's a persistent one. I think there are some changes that would go a long way to improving the conditions inside those facilities in terms of contraband. Many of those recommendations have not yet been implemented.
So to what extent do you see the prevalence of corruption, waste, fraud, abuse right now as a problem across city government? Is this something that just even in your tenure you think is getting better, is getting worse? Is there a heightened sense of brazenness in certain ways across the city based on larger political trends or examples set at the highest levels of city or federal government? We're here on Law Day, obviously. There's upholding the rule of law is central to your mission. What's your assessment of that sort of pervasiveness, that level of corruption, fraud, abuse in city government right now?
Well, look, I think it's hard. I think it's hard to sort of give a global assessment. I mean, I certainly think that we've seen at many levels, when you look at, there are cases that we do kind of across a variety of agencies, first of all, that involve basic sort of employee misconduct. We see it on the outside too with vendors, but you see employees who take advantage of their role and their position in the system in various ways. Frankly, these are smaller cases that don't get a lot of attention. I think that's a persistent problem. Whether that's worse or better now than it was in the past, I think is hard to say, right? I think if you're talking about senior levels of city government, I think it's fair to say that what we've seen over the past few years, I think, has been unprecedented, right? An indictment, and obviously, and I'm sure we'll get to this, the case has been dismissed, but an indictment, of a sitting city mayor is unprecedented. Investigations of numerous senior officials at City Hall is unprecedented. Resignations of the type that we've seen, also unprecedented. And I think certainly that has an impact and sends a message in terms of the importance of compliance, the importance of anti-corruption efforts. Again, as we say in many of the announcements that we make, conduct of that nature unfairly, to some extent, suggests that everyone in city government is corrupt. That is certainly not the case. The vast majority of the public servants that we see are, good, hardworking people trying to serve the public with integrity. But certainly, I think what we've seen is unusual and raises significant concerns about the priorities at senior levels.
So in the trickle down of that, as you're conducting these investigations, do you get a sense that there's a heightened sense among sort of rank and file in the city of brazenness around this, or it's hard to draw?
I don't think I can say that,
Yeah.
actually. I mean, we have, for example, we continue to work with agency heads to obtain the information that we need for our investigations, right? I mean, we have legal authority to seize documents and compel witness interviews, but we depend very much on the good cooperation and communication that we have with agency heads. And I have not seen, I have not seen that change since I got here until now. So I don't think it would be fair to say that the problems, that have obviously existed at senior levels in this administration have changed, the way the work of the city is being done at other levels. I haven't seen that.
At the same time, in your reporting, you've increased the number of arrests last year despite headcount being down. What do you attribute that to? Is that the sharper investigative techniques? Well, so how does headcount being down, arrests being up, but we're not quite sure if it's, I mean, the numbers are not that drastic. So
right. I think you got to sort of be careful with too much reading into the numbers, right? I mean, I think the work and the arrests that we've done over the last few years is a product of the cases that we've had, that they've been chargeable criminal cases, the hard work, that we've done. I think it's extraordinary that we've done what we've done with the head count that we have. And I really do attribute it to the excellence of all of the people who are working so hard at the agency. And hopefully we've facilitated their efforts by, promoting efficiency and trying to make sure people feel comfortable. If a case doesn't require 20 steps, let's resolve it in 10 steps, not 20, and to be very conscious of that. But, again, I think it's very hard to sort of correlate headcount and arrests. When you look at sort of the trajectory, arrest numbers were highest if in recent memory, maybe in 2017, 2016, they went sort of down. In 18, 19, they stayed down. In COVID, they started to go back up. 22, 23, 24, they're still not up to where they were pre-COVID. Some of that is the changes in discovery rules. I think prosecutors who have, substantial workloads now of their own and are also understaffed and are grappling with, the massive requirements of the current discovery rules. I think there are higher thresholds for taking criminal cases. So I think that's part of the reasons that some of the numbers have gone down. I think it's hard to say.
If there was something you could change across city government about ethics training or laws or something that sort of seems systemic or thematic in the work you've seen, is there a suggestion that you would have for the way that city government writ large could do business in a different way to be more preventative? I know you have, I believe, increased, or you've had a lot of focus on education and trainings to try to be more preventative, to try to get the message across to city workers. Don't try it because we're watching, and other nicer ways of saying that. But is there something you would change in that regard?
Well, one of the things that we're working on is implementation of our recommendations. So I think what I would like to see, and we're doing pretty well, depending on how you look at the data. We have, if you look at from 2014 to 2024, then you can say we have over 82% acceptance rate for the recommendations that we make for policy and procedural change, and an over 85% implementation rate. If you look at the last couple of years, it drops to numbers in the 60s. And I think that's partly because it takes time sometimes to get recommendations implemented. We are making more of an effort, not just to make the recommendations and persuade the agencies initially to accept them and implement them, but to continue that effort out over time. So I think one of the things we found, and we discovered this maybe a year or so ago, is that we could be doing better and more focused follow-up. So I would like to see more implementation across the city of the recommendations that we make. Sometimes that requires a financial commitment, because there are certain, like when we recommend that DOB have more inspectors to focus on OSHA card fraud, for example. DOB agreed to accept that recommendation. It was made in connection with a big criminal case we did with the DA's office, where we charged a number of fraudulent brokers and card providers who were basically giving out OSHA cards to workers who didn't have the training, which is a safety risk for them and for the public. DOB would like to implement that recommendation, but they don't have sufficient staff right now to do that. And so I think there could be more of a kind of coherent citywide effort to look at the recommendations that we're making, to see which ones should be prioritized, and to put some financial support behind that. I think that's a change that I would like to see. We are doing that work incrementally, but I think there could be a broader sort of effort of that kind.
It seems like in that regard, you need more partnership from the city council. It strikes me, take a drink. It strikes me that there could be more dedicated oversight hearings at the council that follow up on your recommendations, because you can follow up with the agencies, as you just said, but you're still prodding and poking, and it's more private. Maybe that's helpful.
So I think I would tweak that a little
Please.
bit. And I would say where we could really use, I think, that kind of input would be at the city hall level. The city council actually has been a very supportive partner for us, and they do routinely hold hearings on reports that we do and recommendations that we make. We did a recent NYCHA report relating to the providers of security and fire guard services. And we issued the report, and I think weeks later, the city council held a hearing to talk about the issues that we raised and the recommendations that we made. So I think some of this doesn't really require a hearing or a legislative change, although that has happened also, and that is helpful. And there are some examples of that we could talk about. But I think it requires more of sort of a whole government effort. And when you're talking about multiple agencies, that would really need to include City Hall.
Sure. And I know City Council Member Gail Brewer, who currently chairs the Oversight and Investigations Committee, is particularly interested in the recommendations that you make in your reports, and would probably jump out of her seat if she was here to correct me on the City Council's role.
They have been big supporters, I have to say.
Okay. Law Day, Purge. You mentioned the unprecedented charges against the mayor, where DOI was investigative partner. The mayor was charged with 5 federal counts of conspiracy, wire fraud, or bribery. The charges have since been dismissed, as everybody here and around the city probably know. Can you say a little bit at how DOI was a partner in that investigation? You've made remarks about DOI being valuable there and elsewhere, about unique access and expertise in city records. What can you share about how DOI played a role in that investigation?
Sure. So I'm not, and I typically don't sort of speak about exactly what investigative work we do on any particular investigation when that's not already part of the public record. But what I can say is, in every investigation that we do, we really are full partners. So sometimes, like in the Bureau of Fire Prevention case example that I gave, we are the ones who begin the investigation. Sometimes we don't begin the investigation, but the existing, investigating agencies, let's say like the FBI, the Southern District of New York, the Eastern District, will bring us in part because of the access and knowledge that we have. So we have access to city records, sometimes covert, depending on the agency. And I'm talking then about things like emails and other electronic records. We also have access to any other city document that we need for an investigation that we're doing. But fundamentally, we have that sort of deep knowledge about how the city works, how procurement works, how contracting works. And it's that kind of expertise that that our law enforcement partners are really drawing on and that we're utilizing in our investigations. But we are never in a role where we're sort of simply information gatherers. If we are an investigative partner, we are a full sort of part of the strategy and working that case. And that's how we work every investigation.
You stressed around the dismissal that the push to dismiss was not, at least purportedly, about the strength of the case. There was different rationale given. And there was some debate about whether that case should have been brought and how strong the case actually was. How confident were you in the strength of that case? And are there particular pieces that you felt like were more of a slam dunk than others?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna break it down in that way today. But I will say that in every case where we stand up, I mean, particularly when we're standing up to announce it, but whether we're standing up or not, in every case that we bring, we are confident in the charges, in the evidence, in the way we've done the investigation, or we wouldn't be doing it. And that's true. That was true in the case against the mayor. It's true in sort of every other case. We don't, we're not in this sort of halfway. We're not sort of leaving for other people the responsibility of whether it's a good case or not. I mean, obviously, the decision whether to charge or not to charge is ultimately with the prosecutor's office, and the decision whether to pursue a case or dismiss it is ultimately with the Department of Justice, right? If they're the prosecuting agency or the DA's office, we don't control that. But that doesn't mean that we don't feel, and it's not our obligation to make sure that we are wholly supportive and confident in the matters that we're bringing. I think as a law enforcement agency, that's our obligation. And if we had doubts or reservations, we would always raise those to the prosecutors. And if necessary, we would say, we're not going to further participate in this case. And there have been examples of cases where we've said, we don't think this should be brought. Maybe it's chargeable, but there may be reasons that in our discretion and in a prosecutor's discretion, we don't think the case should be brought. And we are not quiet about that when that's how we feel.
What was the impact, or what is the impact on DOI, on the agency, on people who worked on the case or even just had an interest in it because DOI had a role? What's the impact of the charges being dismissed and the sense that this is undermining good investigative work and charges that you felt were justified?
Yeah, well, I think that there's, first of all, I think in terms of how we do our work and how we pursue cases and how we do investigations and which cases we're involved in, it has zero impact, right? This dismissal was not, and many of you, I'm sure, have read the judge's opinion, which is a pretty detailed sort of exploration of these issues. But the decision on the part of the department to dismiss it, and certainly the judge's opinion dismissing it, it is not an exoneration of anybody. It is not a criticism of how the investigation was conducted. It is not a criticism of the prosecutors who charged the case, or the timing of the case, or the motives behind it, or anything else. It was certainly an unprecedented decision on the part of DOJ to dismiss it, but I don't view it as something that should influence in any way how DOI pursues cases.
Did you have to talk some people there sort of off the ledge, so to speak, who are upset about their work being dismissed? I mean, that must have had a morale impact on at least the people most directly involved in the case.
We absolutely talked about it. And of course, it is disheartening and disappointing when significant work and resources and effort, and as I had said before, we are committed to the cases that we bring. We don't do this in a half-hearted way. Like, of course, on a personal and professional level, it's disappointing, but we're all professionals here, and so no one had to be talked off any ledges, and I think we take a lot of comfort from the fact that we feel like throughout this investigation, we all did the right thing. We did work that we should be proud of. I think, as we indicated early on, I think there was a statement that we made about, we're proud of the work that our colleagues at the Bureau and the prosecutors that we work with in the Southern District did. And so I think that's sort of what we stand on and what we feel good about. There are things you can control and things you can't control. And we did the work in the way that we always do it, and that's what we could control, and that's what we should think about, and that's what we should take going forward.
Two things on the judge's ruling in the case that you mentioned. One, as you mentioned, Judge Ho did not at all impugn the investigation that was conducted, but the mayor has, the president has, DOJ has. We've seen, obviously, prosecutors resigning because they would not go along with filing to dismiss. How do you react when you hear the mayor who nominated you, who you had to stand up there and talk at a press conference announcing charges against him, is there saying this was politically motivated and sort of out to get him?
I mean, I've given you my view of how I see the case, and obviously the mayor can and should and is speaking about how he sees the case, and that's certainly his right to do.
Did you agree with the judge's decision to dismiss without prejudice? I'm sorry, with prejudice, or would you have preferred without?
I agreed with the judge's decision.
On a different front, right now, as we were getting at, you are regularly in a much more traditional conflict with the mayor around the budget and around headcount at DOI. But there's also this, and we'll get to that in one second, but there's also this in-between ground where swirling around all of this were questions about safeguarding you in your role. The governor made recommendations, and you've recently made recommendations, at least things you think should be considered about providing more sort of protection for DOI on 3 fronts. Do you want to explain those, and if there's any 1 or 2 or all 3 that you really do want to see pursued?
Sure. So I think one of the most important of the measures that we're thinking about is protection for termination for the DOI commissioner. So currently, the mayor can fire the DOI commissioner with a statement of reasons, and the commissioner has an opportunity to respond to those reasons publicly. And if you think about it, and particularly given what's going on in the current environment with the firing of IGs, that's not really very much protection at all. It's sort of an exchange of information publicly. The city council, of course, can always hold a hearing. So there's a maybe public or political pressure on the mayor through the current, rules to not fire a DOI commissioner for an improper reason, relating to investigations that DOI is conducting, et cetera. But there's no real, protection. So one proposal recommendation that we have is that the city council play a role in that process, and that firing of the DOI commissioner be for cause. So there has to be, a basis, some kind of wrongdoing, and the city council would have to play a part in agreeing to the termination, the same way the city council plays a part in approving in the nomination of the DOI commissioner, which has to be approved by the city council. So that is one significant measure. The other is budget independence. And I've made very clear that we have not been, and our budget has not been a target of the administration. There has not been retaliation against us from a budget perspective for our work. At the same time, we're hardly a priority for the administration. And you can see that, future administrations are going to have priorities and ways they want to spend their money that may not include, enhancing their oversight agency. Right. And so having an independent budget and exactly how that would work is something that we're spending a lot of time thinking about. But having some budgetary independence, I think, would also be very significant for the agency and give us more control over hiring and structuring and promotion, which we currently don't have because we're always in that back and forth, as all agencies are, with OMB.
And just quickly before you get into the third one, there are, as many people here probably know, formulas that are at play for other agencies in city government that sort of figure out an independent budget in some way.
Yeah, there are some agencies that have that.
You could. Those are 2, I think.
Those are 2.
Yes. Did you have a third?
You're looking for a third.
Yes. It was.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, the tenure of the commissioner.
I'm getting hand signals from the person who knows the most about
tenure,
this.
yes.
Right, the tenure. Yeah, yes. And so I think this is, maybe because I don't think of this as sort of the weightiest one, but one other possibility is a term for the commissioner that spans mayoral administrations. And
like the FBI director.
Exactly. Now, obviously, that doesn't eliminate, that doesn't eliminate the risk of a mayor trying to pick a DOI commissioner that is going to be under their control to some extent, because there will be mayoral involvement in that selection, but at least it's a longer tenure. So that's another possible. Mm-hmm. It's another possible option.
Have you had any? So you said you have no indication that there's budget retaliation. Have you had any indication that the mayor was looking to dismiss you? I mean, he called again. No?
None. I mean, I do have to say, because it's true, City Hall has never tried to interfere in any way that I've seen anyway, in any investigation that we've done. They've not tried to find out the status or tell us to do or not do anything. They have really let us do our work, which is exactly what they should have done, but is particularly notable, I think, in the current environment and the kind of work that we've been doing over the last few years.
And for those that might not be familiar, this would not have been an unprecedented situation. One of your recent predecessors was dismissed by Mayor de Blasio and Mark Peters. Have you studied that? Have you looked at that? I mean, is that informing some of your thinking here on the question of protections and the city council approval of dismissal?
I have studied that situation, but I can't really say that the facts there, which I think were quite unique, have had any impact in our thinking about the types of protections that would be appropriate now.
Obviously, you want independent budgeting because you're struggling with, you have a 17% vacancy rate at the department.
I think it may be a little bit lower
Okay.
right now, but
You
yes,
had-
it's been a continuing challenge.
Yes. So let's talk about that in a second. So obviously you want that, but if you could see a protection put into place, the preference is city council approval of a dismissal is,
Yes.
is sort of your
Yes, I think that balance makes a lot of sense and makes more sense than having any sort of state involvement in the commissioner's sort of role and protection, because I think we really are a city agency, and I think city entities like the mayor and the city council are best situated if there is an issue with the DOI commissioner to decide whether that person should be terminated or not.
So say a little bit more about your challenges right now. We obviously have people in the room who might be interested in working at DOI, and Dean Crowell mentioned that there are a lot of graduates of New York Law School that go into public service, including at DOI, but you're having significant challenges with staffing that relate to a whole number of things. One is the administration's policies around hiring, and there was a lot of shifting directives on this, hiring freeze, 2 out, 1 in, different
Right.
things like that. But there's also challenges competing with the private sector, and maybe you can say a little bit about the concrete nature of those, but then also how you view public sector work as, okay, people are willing to sacrifice some on their finances, let's say, to work in the public sector, but to a point, and how those sort of converge.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think everyone who is working at DOI has made the choice to make significant, sacrifices. And I think one of the challenges that we have is that people know that they can command much higher salaries in the private sector with the kind of expertise that they have. This was particularly difficult for us when we didn't offer remote work. And so we were faced with the prospect of losing people not only to jobs that paid higher salaries, but arguably had sort of a better lifestyle component, which is not normally how people think about private sector jobs. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a challenge for any government entity and any government job, right? And I do think it's balanced by the tremendous joy and excitement and meaningful work that we all find doing public service and doing it here in this particular way. So that's sort of a baseline challenge. And when then you layer on top of that, we had gotten through a round of budget cuts that included early on in my tenure here a headcount cut. It was a vacant headcount cut, so we weren't terminating anyone, but we were limiting our ability to hire, and essentially we're being blamed for vacancies or punished for vacancies by having them taken away when the vacancies were there, in part because of the challenging hiring conditions, right? Luckily, we're no longer in a headcount cut space. And we have been working to get exceptions for this 2-for-1 hiring practice, which essentially is another kind of headcount cut, sort of by another name. And we have recently gotten some additional headcount in the budget process, which we got 10 new positions, which we are extremely grateful for. And we have been getting some flexibility on the 2-for-1, which we're working with OMB now to try to sort of move that forward. It will make a big difference if we can make a number of hires to try to fill those outstanding vacancies. And sadly, for various reasons, there's a lot of federal government employees who are now looking for alternatives. And so, it is a good time to be hiring. So I'll say that.
We're going to take a couple of audience questions in just a minute. We have a microphone here. Please don't all rush to the microphone, but if a few people want to come up, we'll take a few quick audience questions in a couple minutes. So you can line up while I ask 1 or 2 more. But again, just a few people, please, so don't crowd up there. In that regard, is there a way to capture at all what's not being investigated? You know, you're highlighting, of course, all the good work that's being done, but you need this additional capacity, human capacity to do more investigations. Is there a way to capture what's being sort of left aside, or any specific, well, general examples you could give?
Yeah. So one thing is, you never know what you don't know.
Right.
And when you're focusing resources, and obviously to do the cases that we've done, and particularly the cases and investigations involving senior officials, we've had to sort of surge resources. We've had to kind of borrow from this squad and get folks, to pool enough folks to do the work that we needed. And when you do that, obviously there are things that you're not doing. Now, we've never been in a position where we've had to sort of ignore complaints because we just didn't have time to look at them. But are there things that perhaps we might have been able to dig deeper into? Maybe. I can't tell you what those things are, because if something was worthy of deeper digging, we did it, but there may be some things that we could have pursued that we didn't. I also would like us, and I think we would all like to be doing even more proactive investigations where we're developing creative ways to identify problems before they surface in complaints or media articles. And I think that that's an area that, we're trying to put attention to and maybe could have put more attention to, were we not as focused on, the tremendous amount of work we've been doing over the last couple of years.
All right, I have one or two more I'll finish up with, but why don't we take two audience questions here? Go ahead, sir.
Hi, I'm Claude Millman from Castellanets. So yesterday there was a really interesting city council hearing. The council was listening to the nonprofit providers, the human service providers, that were explaining that the city owes them about $1 billion. Many of them talked about how they're spending millions of dollars in interest payments to banks because of the city's slow payments. And a lot of the issues they talked about, including the processes for reviewing subcontractor approvals and the way the invoices are reviewed, flow from recommendations that DOI has made in the past, and also some of them involve new recommendations that DOI recently made. And I'm wondering if DOI might consider that it's part of the problem with respect to that issue, and if so, if DOI is going to take any steps to alleviate the late payment issue for the not-for-profits.
Yes, well, luckily where we sit, we really can always genuinely consider whether we're part of the problem. But I have to say, the recommendations that we've made in this space, although some of them have been implemented, many of them have not been implemented. And we released a report just last year that sort of highlights the number of recommendations we made that relate to the fact, and just so that we have the context for this, that the city is paying billions of dollars to nonprofits, often in our view with insufficient oversight of how that money is being spent, of conflict of interest transactions where, a member of the board or a head of a nonprofit is contracting for services from that nonprofit with an entity that they own. There are many significant criminal cases that have been made on that basis. So the late payment issue is a huge problem, and the nonprofits are critical to the city. And, absolutely the nonprofits need to get paid, but that doesn't mean that they need to get paid at the expense of, good procedural compliance in terms of, are they actually incurring the expenses that they claim they're incurring? Are the transactions conflicted in some way? And so I think there's a balance, but I think to sort of claim that it's DOI's recommendations, many of which, as I said, have not even been implemented, to claim that we are the reason that the nonprofits are not getting paid on time is simply not accurate. We are always, open to looking at ways of making the process more efficient. But from my knowledge and the work that we've done, that characterization is just not entirely accurate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll just take these two more so nobody get up, please.
Hi, my name is Gideon Soul. I'm finishing my first year here. So you talked a lot about your interactions with City Hall and the role in the city government. Have you had any that has your agency had any negative repercussions from the chaos of the federal government over the last few months? Have you noticed any negative effects the federal government's actions have had on the city?
You're asking about the impact of the
Impacts of federal government action on the city?
I think it's a little soon to tell. It has just been, as we know, 100 days. So I don't have an answer to that yet. I think agencies and the city as a whole, are grappling with sort of what the changes at the federal level, particularly in terms of funding, are going to mean for the city. And I think we need a little more, time to pass before we can really evaluate that.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Commissioner Strauber. It's really great to hear a little bit about the inside of the work that you do. My name's Aria Sundaram. I'm a reporter with WNYC in Gothamist. And I just wanted to know, how do you see your relationship with the media in conducting these investigations? I imagine there's some ways in which our work helps inform the work that you do. I imagine there's concerns around leaks, maybe the concerns around who's leaking to us versus to you, but I'm not sure. I'm curious. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, look, we certainly wish that some of the articles that we read and some of the sources that you mentioned had come to us with their concerns, but we learn a lot from, what we do read. And I think there are folks who will speak to the media and air concerns in a confidential way that we wouldn't hear about otherwise. So like I said, I think we follow, the media very closely, and the coverage of New York, and it's an important part of our investigations. And we try where we can be, and we can't always be as open as we would like, because if there are ongoing investigations, there are just things we can't share. But we try to be as sort of transparent as we can when we get questions from the media about what we are doing, again, within the constraints that as a law enforcement agency, we are operating within.
Thank you.
Last two quick ones for me, and I'll turn it over to the dean for a closing remark. Just to come back to the mayor's case for one moment, I should have asked you, there was some discussion around the potential for the case or parts of it to be picked up at the state level, perhaps by the Manhattan District Attorney. Is that something that you think that office should look at if they aren't?
I'm not going to speak about that.
And
but thanks for
I didn't think so.
But thanks for coming back.
Yes, yes. I will also note, I also wanted to add what you talked about the cases that you reported in your 2024 report, approximately 1,550 active cases at the time. So you do have a lot of open and active cases. All right, last one for me. There's an election happening right now. The mayor may be reelected. The mayor may not be reelected, might be a new mayor. Are you interested in trying to stay on into a term 2 of Eric Adams or a term of a new mayor? Are you starting to think about what's next for you? You must be a little bit.
I'm really focused on doing the work that I'm doing as long as I'm here. And we'll see how long that is, and we'll see what happens with the election. But I really am actually, and I think we've had a lot of conversations about this. I'm focused on making sure that despite, all the things that have happened, and we talked about some of the frustrations or disappointments, that we are all sort of going full speed ahead. We've got, 8 months or so left, and we're going to make the most of that. And that is really what I'm focused on.
Thank you very much for taking all my questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just want to thank all of you for coming. I do want to mention that Ross Sandler, the founder of our center, and he is on sabbatical. He will be back at these breakfasts in the fall. And what's exciting is he's actually away writing a book on corruption, which I think we'll all be interested to hear about. And certainly some of it stems from his time in the Koch administration during a time of significant challenges. Also want to say, some of you have asked me what the Collins College of Criminology is. When you walked in, it's actually for a movie shoot or a film shoot. Dexter Resurrection is filming here today and tomorrow into Saturday morning. So we, as usual, New York is always so exciting with film shoots. We are a frequent host, often to Law and Order, who most recently had our campus as the set of Mercy Hospital, which I thought was No Mercy Hospital. But in any event, Commissioner, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. It was a really informative and thoughtful discussion, and one that I think gives great confidence to us at a moment like this in our collective history nationally, and thinking about where the city goes. And it's a nice way to celebrate Law Day. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Our next event is the morning of May 13th, a City Law Breakfast with State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. So please RSVP for that and join us on May 13th with the State Comptroller.